Hi, my name is Greg Mathias. I'm one of the associate directors of the Center for Great Commission Studies here at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And I want to spend a few moments just talking to you about why I love reading missionary biographies. My love for and my engagement in missionary biographies began when I was in college. Since that time, I continue to consistently pick up missionary biographies. I read the stories of these men and women. I'm challenged by them. I'm inspired by them. And so I want to give you a few thoughts on why you would want to read missionary biographies if that's something that you haven't done or haven't done much of. And then after that, I want to spend a few moments talking about how you would read missionary biographies. I think that's an important piece. And then finally, I'll give you a few suggestions of some biographies that I appreciate that have been helpful and challenging in my own life. And so the first reason why would you want to read missionary biographies? I think they can be an important component of your own spiritual growth and formation. Again, I've read missionary biographies for a number of years. But to be honest, the way I've gone about reading them has changed over the years. I don't simply go to them now to find inspiration or incredible stories. Sometimes the stories you read almost seem otherworldly, like these men and women live on a different planet in different times and lives. And so I do find those things in some of these biographies, but I read them now and I look to these men and women as a type of mentor for me. And again, the Christian life's difficult. We all need mentors. You need people that are older than you in your life. You need people close to your same age. You also need to look to be that mentor to those younger in the faith than you are. But again, we all need mentors, and I think we need living mentors as well as dead ones. And oftentimes when I read about missionaries or read in missionary biographies, these are a great source for mentoring in my own life. Again, when I'm reading these, I'm seeing how these men and women lived out their faith in different circumstances, different contexts, as they engaged in missions, and it's very helpful for me because the Christian life isn't just about learning or being told what to do, what not to do. It's about seeing it lived out in other people's lives, and so missionary biographies can give me a great source, many people to look to and emulate in many different ways. And so part of my spiritual growth and formation in that is, as you and I participate in missions, I don't think it's just, again, something we are doing, but it's a vital part of our growth in Christ, our spiritual formation. And so as we do that, we should be growing not only to look like Christ, but to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, that our character should be transformed and be growing in positive directions. And so oftentimes I can look at the lives of men and women who have lived as missionaries, those that have gone before me. And again, it's a part of my spiritual formation, my mentoring. And so I read missionary biographies for that. And so that's been helpful for me. Secondly, why read missionary biographies? Again, spiritual formation, but then beyond that is kind of figuring out this idea that I call transference. What does that mean? Well, oftentimes when we think of missions or engaging in mission, it boils down to common sense thinking or problem solving about issues that may be faced as I engage somebody, trying to do evangelism and discipleship, as I'm crossing into maybe a different culture, encountering other barriers. And so we just try to figure those things out. And that's all well and good. But beyond that, I think we can look back to these men and women that have gone before us, and we can see what kind of challenges or issues did they face? How did they deal with things? And we can begin to, in essence, take that baton from them. We don't have to always figure things out on our own, the right here and now. We can look back to those that have gone before us and, in other words, kind of receive that baton of mission and ministry. But also, too, I think we can look, how did they not just receive the baton in their own time, but how did they pass on ministry? How did they pass on their engagement in missions to the generations coming behind them. You often see that interaction in these missionary biographies, the transference of ministry and mission to generations to come. And so I think it's really instructive to read in missionary biographies. How did they deal with older generations, younger generations? And again, it gets us outside of just the here and now, the common sense thinking. And so I read missionary biographies and find a lot of instructive lessons there. Then finally, and this is implied in some of the things I was just talking about, but I think we read missionary biographies, and it's a great bridge between the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Again, the Great Commission, it is something that we are called to do, to be about, to obey, but it's more than just a task to obey. That at the end of the day, that hopefully the Great Commission, if it's a part of our spiritual formation and we're being shaped and formed as we engage in missions, as we are a part of the Great Commission, that we are becoming Great Commission people, not just Great Commission doers. And so I think reading these biographies about these men and women as they live out the Great Commission, actually what we see is they're living out the Great Commandment in the context of the Great Commission. That in whatever context they find themselves, the circumstances that they are currently facing, that these men and women loved God fully, and then through that love of God, they are loving others around them. And so that's very instructional for me. It's a part of my formation, but these biographies provide that bridge between the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And so I think those are just a few reasons why we should read missionary biographies. At the end of the day, they are important to our spiritual formation. They help us learn lessons even about kind of transferring our ministry, our mission, our loves to the generations that are coming behind us, but also how do we receive that from those that have gone before us. And then it really is a good kind of bridge between the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And so just a few thoughts on how we go about reading these missionary biographies. One, I think we need to read them with integrity. We have a habit of, as we present missionaries that have come before us, that we present them just kind of carte blanche. These are almost perfect men and women that we just need to emulate fully. And while I do believe we can learn a lot of positive things from these men and women of faith, we need to remember that they weren't perfect. When they arrived to the mission field, when they engaged in their ministry, they weren't a finished product. They weren't finished with their spiritual growth, but they were very much in process, just as you and I are. And so oftentimes the lesson we can learn from these men and women of faith, these missionaries, is maybe how not to respond to certain situations or how not to do something. And so we just need to read with our eyes wide open and read with integrity. And we need to learn from them the good, but also the bad and even the ugly. Secondly, I think we need to read with humility. We need to read with a learner's posture. Again, we don't just go to missionary biographies for what inspires us or what we can critique, but we need to ask, what can we learn from these men and women, the lives they lived, the ministries that were produced through their lives. What are the things I can learn? Maybe it's about methodology. Perhaps it's about motivation, or even my own walk with the Lord, my calling and my living out of missions wherever I happen to be. Because again, these men and women, many times they've gone where you currently stand, the issues you're facing, the challenges you're trying to overcome, the things you're wrestling with God about. And so we need to say, Lord, what can I learn from these men and women? What can I employ in my own life? And that leads me to my last point. We need to read them with integrity, with humility, but also prayerfully. Again, asking the Lord, what would you have me do with these lessons that I'm learning? And I'll just kind of summarize this point by kind of a quote from the end of one missionary biography about Bill Wallace, who was a Southern Baptist missionary to China, whose life was taken via martyrdom. Kind of commenting on his life and death, someone said, "I refuse to count his life, Bill Wallace's life, a tragedy. It was a beautiful life lived with a magnificent purpose, that was and is being realized. And so I think you can pray to God, hey, as I read about these men and women, as I'm reading this missionary biography, God, what is that magnificent purpose you have for my life? How would you have me emulate the good, the bad, or the ugly? How would you have me live my life differently because of what I'm now reading? And Lord, maybe where would you have me live my life for you because of what I'm now reading? And so that's another way. Just prayerfully read those missionary biographies. And then let me just end this with a few recommendations of missionary biographies. If this is something newer to you or new to you, I might encourage you to read kind of a compilation, a book that has shorter kind of biographies, but all compiled together, so it gives you a good breadth of biographies. Two quick recommendations. One would be by Danny Akin, 10 Who Have Changed the World. Again, these are based upon sermons that he's given, where he's incorporated missionary biography into the sermon, and so there's quite a few biographies, stories in there, and that would be helpful. Another longer one would be Ruth Tucker. This is a classic called From Jerusalem to Irian Jaya, and she really goes throughout mission history, kind of on the back of missionary biography, and so this will give you a lot of stories about men and women of faith throughout Christian missions history. Then a few that I would recommend in terms of just more pure missionary biographies. I've already mentioned this is a red book, but this is Bill Wallace. This is his biography, Bill Wallace of China. A great read there. Maybe the biography on John Patton. He was a missionary to the New Hebrides. Again, fascinating story. We learn a lot of positive lessons, but probably even some that we would say are things we don't want to emulate, but a great faith-building story there. Of course, there are a couple, many actually, biographies about Jim Elliot. One would be Shadow of the Almighty. Another is Through the Gates of Splendor. Jim Elliot is a very good read. Of course, my own preference and biases. I think everybody needs to read something about Zwimmer, Samuel Zwimmer. He was the apostle to Islam, and here's one right here. Finally, one of my favorites that I go back to often was one closer to home, The Life and Diary of David Brainerd. This is a challenging read, encouraging in many ways, but wow, he really gives you the reality of what it was like to walk with the Lord, to be a missionary among Native Americans here in the United States. And so a short life, but a vivid life. Two others that I recommend often, which I don't have to show you right now, but would be Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. Is a really good read, especially if you're contemplating the life and work of a missionary. This will be a good read. And finally, an older book that you can still get. It's out of print, but you can still find it on different places. It's called Mountain Rain, and it's a biography of James Fraser. He was a missionary to China. And so those are just a few recommendations on some missionary biographies. There are many out there. But again, I hope if you do currently read them, you will continue to read missionary biographies, that you'll be challenged, you'll be inspired, you'll be engaged, and you'll consider how can I live my life before the Lord wherever He has you, and then how can I love others? And I hope maybe a part of your growth in the Lord is by reading missionary biographies. Thanks, and have a great day.